January 30th, 1943. From the town of Buzuluk in the Urals, soldiers of the 1st Czechoslovak Independent Field Battalion, led by Ludvík Svoboda, who had organized and prepared them for almost a year and who had been promoted to colonel, depart for the front. It'll distinguish itself in just 5 weeks at the Battle of Sokolovo and will continue to grow. Already as a brigade, it'll take part in the liberation of Kiev in November. And next March, it'll become into the 1st Czechoslovak Army Corps, numbering about 16,000 men and women. With the Red Army, it'll fight his way to liberate from the Nazis almost all of pre-war Czechoslovakia. The war ends when Svoboda finds himself in Moravia, and then he'll arrive to the capital of Prague on May 10th. The 49-year-old Svoboda is no longer at the head of the corps. His success on the front sends him upward. In April, he became Minister of National Defense in the re-established Czechoslovak government. And in August, he's promoted to the highest rank of Army General. It seems that after fighting in 2 wars and experiencing many twists, turns, and tragedies in his life, he could settle down in calmer waters. But that's a mistake. The roller coaster ride of his ups and downs is far from over. He was born in 1895 in Hroznatín in the Bohemian Moravian Highlands. His father died when he was 1 year old and his mother remarried. He graduated from an agricultural school in Velké Meziříčí, and it seemed that he's meant to live at home on the farm. But then war came into his life for the first time. In 1914, World War I began, and a year later, 19-year-old Ludvík was drafted for Austro-Hungarian army. He was captured on the Russian front and joined the Czechoslovak legions. He fought on the side of Tsarist Russia against the Austria-Hungary in the famous Battle of Zborov. And after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, he, with 40,000 other legionnaires, was stranded in Russia. They were drawn into the Russian Civil War between the Bolsheviks and their opponents, and Svoboda was one of those who traveled back home around the entire world. First by the Trans-Siberian Railway to Vladivostok, then by American ships via the Japanese island of Hokkaido, San Francisco, the Panama Canal and Norfolk in Virginia all the way to Trieste. He eventually reached newly born Czechoslovakia, now a captain, in September 1920, 2 years after the end of the war and after 5 long years abroad. Because his brother Joseph died in the war, Ludvík settled at the family estate where he began taking care of the farm. But he soon returned to the army, first to his former regiment in Kroměříž, then he was transferred to Užhorod in Transcarpathia, which became part of Czechoslovakia after World War I. Before that, he got married. His wife Irina was 5 years younger, came from a miller's family, and they'll spend the rest of their life together. They'll have 2 children, son Miroslav and daughter Zoe. In Užhorod, he commanded a diverse mix of soldiers, many of whom spoke only Hungarian. Therefore, he decided to learn the language. He studied it in Bratislava, and only few Czechoslovak officers knew it. The pre-war period and mobilization against Hitler in 1937 came when he was back in Kroměříž. After the Munich betrayal and the Nazi occupation of Czech lands in March 1939, he and many others fled to Poland, where they wanted to form a unit to fight against the Germans. But on September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland from one side and Stalin from the other, leaving them in a hopeless situation. They ended up in Soviet internment with their future highly uncertain. Svoboda, already a lieutenant colonel, negotiated intensively with the Soviets. It is speculated that he was in contact with Russian intelligence and later, although he was mistakenly arrested and faced the death penalty, even with the NKVD Secret Service. In any case, their position changed dramatically in June 1941 when Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. Svoboda began forming a Czechoslovak unit in Buzuluk and preparing it to fight alongside the Soviet army. when behind-the-scenes battles begin over whether the unit will be more influenced by the Soviets and Czechoslovak communists in Moscow exile or by the then officially recognized government in London exile, Svoboda prefers Moscow. On the other hand, his primary concern is always the combat readiness of his units, and he tries to suppress politics and personnel disputes within the unit. First, he commands his battalion, and many will later agree that he does very well. He has great military and personal experience. He is demanding, but the soldiers under him aren't just some fighting force, but human beings, and that's how he treats them. But when it grows into an army corps, General Jan Kratochvíl, appointed by the London government, will take command. The situation changes in the fall of 1944 after the passage through the Dukla Pass into Slovak territory turned into a living hell and the corps suffers heavy losses. At that time, the Red Army commanding Marshal Konev decides to dismiss Kratochvíl and replace him with Svoboda. Politics may also have played a role, as the struggle between pro-Western and pro-Soviet direction continued even during those 80 cruel days at Dukla. Around the same time, Svoboda learns of tragic fate of his family. The Svobodas illegally hid Czechoslovak partisans sent from the Soviet Union with a radio transmitter. The Gestapo found out and arrested most of his family. 2 brothers of Svoboda's wife Irina, her mother, and their underage son Miroslav were executed. Only Irina and the teenage daughter Zoe survived. Both hid with acquaintances until liberation. When the war is finally over, better times should come, and General Ludvík Svoboda should enjoy his newly acquired position. But his brilliant career as Minister of National Defense won't last long. The communists carefully consolidate their power and eliminate the opposition until February 1948 arrives. Svoboda, like President Beneš, consistently maintained the principle that the army mustn't interfere in domestic political events. But when armed people's militias march into the streets, it essentially means support for the communist coup. In November 1948, Svoboda, until then officially non-partisan, joined the Communist Party. But even that won't help him. Time of purges is coming, and any slightly moderate stance, past or present, won't be forgiven. Svoboda is by many communists drunk with power, labeled as politically unreliable and an obstacle to military reform. In April 1950, he is replaced by President Gottwald's son-in-law, Alexei Čepička, in his position of Minister of Defense. 2 years later, Ludvík Svoboda is arrested and on his way to prison. Thanks to intervention from the Moscow higher circles, he is released after a month and retires. He works in an agricultural cooperative in Hroznatín, and in 1953, when Stalin and Czechoslovak Communist President Gottwald die shortly after each other, his situation improves. Stalin's successor, Khrushchev, knows him well and likes him. And so in 1954, he is rehabilitated and returns to public life. Among other things, he becomes a member of parliament. But the real comeback comes after the start of the so-called Prague Spring, the attempt to humanize the communist regime. Czechoslovakia sets out on its own path of democratic reforms. In March 1968, 72-year-old Svoboda is elected president of the republic. He's the ideal candidate at that time. He's a communist. Moscow values and respects him, but he has never been a fanatic. And in the 1950s, he didn't taint himself with atrocities. And ordinary people are enthusiastic just because of his surname, which when translated to English means freedom.
Slibuji na svou čest a svědomí věrnost Československé socialistické republice a věci socialismu. Své povinnosti budu konat podle vůle lidu a v zájmu lidu budu dbát blaha republiky a zachovávat ústavu a ostatní zákony socialistického státu.
But as so often in his life, his joy and sense of satisfaction will be short-lived. In August 1968, Soviet tanks arrive and bring the Prague Spring to an end. Ludvík Svoboda shows his character in this moment of crisis. When representatives of the conservative wing of the Communist Party, led by Indra and Bilak, come to see him at the castle, he rejects their demand to quickly appoint a new pro-Moscow government. And when the Soviets kidnap 6 representatives of the reformist wing, including General Secretary of the Communist Party Dubček, the Speaker Smrkovsky, and Prime Minister Černík, Svoboda leads a delegation to go after them. After brutal pressure, Czechoslovak representatives signed the so-called Moscow Protocol, which retroactively legalizes the entry of Soviet troops into Czechoslovak territory. Only one refuses to add his signature, František Kriegel, chairman of the National Front. The Soviets want to keep him in Moscow for that, and there is a great danger that he will never return home. Even here, Svoboda acts fairly. He refuses to leave without Kriegel and fights to get him back to Prague. He possibly saved his life. After the return from Moscow, Svoboda believed that the Soviets would withdraw and life would go on as before. But he was wrong. He believed that the new General Secretary of the party, Gustav Husak, would pursue a decent politics due to his imprisonment in the 50s, but he initiated the so-called Normalization. Purges throughout the country that destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and were a complete negation of the Prague Spring. Ludvík Svoboda remained in the presidential office after 1969. However, in June 1972, he had a stroke, and after that, he was never the same. In 1973, he was re-elected head of state, but after further health problems, he was increasingly absent until in 1975, when he was replaced by Gustav Husak on the basis of a law passed specifically for this. Ludvík Svoboda then lived with his wife Irena in a house in Prague's Brevnov district. He died in September 1979 at the age of 83. His wife passed away 10 months after him. Historical evaluation of Ludvík Svoboda often differs today. For some, he was a resolute soldier who, although sometimes unable to effectively stand up to evil, at least tried not to aid it. Others say that his guilt is considerable and that he played an undeniable role in both tragedies that befell Czechoslovakia, in 1948 communist coup and the normalization after 1968. Interestingly, the truth is quite possibly both.